So now that we've found our stance, the next thing I want to do is talk you through a few fundamentals of basic footwork before we go on to our basic steps, combination steps, and also a few footwork drills that you'll be able to practice at home. So from our opening stance, the first thing that I wanted to talk to you about is the importance of keeping your knees bent. It can be quite easy to get into bad habits where you rise up, straighten your knee as you would in your normal gait as you walk. But keeping those knees bent and making sure that you're keeping your knees over your toes as you move through your footwork gives you greater fluidity of motion, it gives you more control, and it certainly allows you to keep a little bit more balance than you possibly would if you're rising up and not keeping a nice bend on the knee. The second thing, which I touched on in our basic guard video, is that you want to have that back foot still pointing forward at your opponent as much as you can. The reason for that is that a lot of people tend to want to try and actually cant that back foot so that you have your feet at 90 degrees because it kind of feels more like a traditional Olympic style fencing. The problem with this is because our power generation is largely rotational, if we have our feet pointed forward at our opponent, it allows us a greater range of movement from the hip, which means that from this point, I'm able to cut completely through my opponent, and my hip and shoulder have a lot of freedom to cleave through our target, as opposed to if I just cant that back foot at 90 degrees, it binds my hip and shoulder, so I'm not able to cut through the same way I was before because I'm bound at this point. And it's going to restrict your power generation a lot. You'll probably find that it's very difficult to strike with power because you'll just be nicking the surface, not cleaving through. So just by pointing your toes forward, you'll probably find a huge amount of help in your power generation and your fluidity of movement overall. The next thing is we want to keep the weight on the balls of the feet. Now this doesn't mean to be on your toes. If you feel like you're on your toes, you're too far forward and you'll find yourself out of balance. And if you're on your heel, you'll find that you become more grounded and you won't get that fluidity and that ease of bouncy motion that you might want. Because our natural walking gait is generally heel to toe, it can be quite tempting again to fall into that bad habit. However, when we actually fight, we want to be gliding over the surface as if we're actually wanting to maintain a little bit of contact with the ground as we move. If we ground our heel first, we're actually sold into that step. We're not able to eject that step until you roll through onto the ball of the foot again. So if you maintain your weight on the ball of the foot as you move through all of your steps, you're able to actually bounce and transition and abort a step if you don't like where you're going. So if I've placed my foot here, if the weight's on the ball of the foot, I can still abort that motion and go the other way or go somewhere else. Whereas if I plant my heel, I can't bounce out of that or shift my weight out of that until I complete the step to be on the ball of the foot. So it ends up selling you into a motion that you might not want to be sold into. And if you know it, your opponent will know it as well. So we've touched on keeping knees bent, weight on the ball of the foot, gliding over the surface. I've been told before that you want to basically feel like you're pushing a coin on the ground as you move. So you don't want to maintain a hard contact, but just a light contact as you move. And having that light contact allows you to move nicely, maintain balance, and never get sold into a motion that you don't like. As we step through, we're going to talk about our gather steps and our passing steps. But specifically, when you move in any direction, you want to be moving the foot that is closest to that direction first. At no point is it good to cross over and cross your legs if you can avoid it. The reason being is that once we're here, we're no longer that nice solid shoulder width apart. You'll end up off balance. Easy to push over, easy to fall over. So front foot forward first is a really good way of describing it, where if I'm going forward, my front foot goes first. If I'm moving backward, my back foot. If I'm moving to the left, that's the right, and if I'm going to the left, left foot. Diagonals as well as we shift. Whatever side keeps you from crossing over. So even though it might be my back foot, I move to that side with my right foot. I'm going left, left. If I'm going diagonally back, right, left. And then finally with our fundamentals, we want to keep even weight distribution between both feet. So this means that at no point should I really be pushing all of my weight back or forward unless it's in transition in a step. Obviously, if you have one foot off the ground, all of your weight is on one foot. But when you're in your basic guard or when you're taking a step, you should be fairly evenly distributed between both feet, again, so that you're never sold into a motion that you can't get out of if you need to. So, just to cover again, we talked about keeping our knees bent, stepping on the ball of the foot, keeping both toes as forward as possible, taking gliding steps over the surface. We talked about front foot forward first and not crossing our legs as we move through our steps, and keeping even weight distribution between both feet. These are our fundamentals. Keep these in mind as we start to go through our basic steps.